Hi there. Just going to change the cam chain tensioners to manual ones on a Hyosung 650.
Okay, this is the manual cam chain adjuster that I got from eBay. They're about 35 bucks each, so I bought two of them. These particular adjusters are for an sv650. Many of the components from an sv650 will fit the Hyosung. There's a very similar designed engine. You'll notice that I've already taken the seat off the bike, and also try and ignore the where the battery. Modified my bike to put a gt650r 750 shock in, which has a remote reservoir there. It's meant I had to move the battery back and so on. So we want to get the tank off, so we remove this bracket which holds the radiator overflow bottle, and it's important to also remove the wires. There's a sensor with it. So here's a close-up of the radiator bottle, and that's the overflow. So remove the tank and the wires with it, and then the bracket with the radiator overflow bottle. Be very careful when removing the tank. It's got a plastic fuel pump connector. It snaps incredibly easily, so don't force it. Okay, I've removed the tank here. I've also taken the bolts off the radiator support bracket and pushed the radiator down. I'm just presuming that if you're going to have a go at cam chain tensioners, you're going to know how to pull down the radiator. Some people will put the radiator off. I've chosen not to. You don't really have to. Anyway, so pull out spark plug, and these are the bolts that we have to remove. There's 4, and we also have to remove this little side cover thing, which you can, which you're able to put your 17mm socket in, and that's how you're going to be turning the engine and aligning the things up for the cam. This little bolt here is another 17, and you remove that so you can see exactly where the timing is from the crank right up to the cams. So here we are. I've already pulled off the bolts here, so they're with a hex key. A little bit of oil comes out, it's not a big deal. And just be careful to have a clean environment. Don't have any dust around, so put it on a towel somewhere, and I just put it upside down and then put all of the hex bolts from the engine straight into it. Now you might want to spray this first with some RP7 or WD-40. As you can see, I've hacked mine because I didn't do that first. You spray them, and with a good big screwdriver you're able to remove that little cover there. So you can see now I'm removing the eye view for the crank or the flywheel, so I can see exactly where I have to line the cam chain up. Now this is where a lot of people get worried. I used to be worried about it, you know, how do I line things up, and what if I get it wrong, and what if I bend a valve and all that sort of stuff. If you just get your head around it, you'll know and basically just follow exactly where the manual tells you to. Now if you look down here, what I'm looking for is an F, and the F means front cylinder. You can see I'm cranking the engine over. Actually, I haven't taken out the spark plug. It's easier if you do the spark plug, but you can see an F and a line down there. That means that what it is that top dead center. Okay, now this cover is for the double overhead cam chain. So there's 3 5mm hex heads here. So just remove them. If you've got a standard Allen key, it's probably the best there. Now they're pretty tight, so I just extended mine, just used a little tube spanner. You do have to be careful with these. They're a very short bolt. like they're only like half an inch long or something like that, so they do have to be tight. I'm not sure what the torque spec is. I should be. Anyway, but I haven't. Just make sure your hex keys are really good. Don't use one from IKEA, because they'll just burr around and then they'll bugger up the bolt and you won't get it out anyway. And then there's one on the back here. See, I'm getting down to, so I'm using the long side of the hex key with my little tube spanner. Now whatever you do, don't drop these down into the engine at this point. Be very, very careful. Hold your fingers on them the whole time you're turning them. So I'll turn with, once I get near the end, I'm turning, and then I'll hold my finger right on. There you can see I can hold my finger on there. It's just one of those things, if you do happen to drop them in there, there are ways of getting them out, but it might take you hours, or you might not get them out at all, and then you've got to pull down the whole engine. Just not worth it. Don't do it to start with. Be extremely careful. Some people might chuck a rag down there. Anyway, so here's the case off. So we can see the cam chain now, and we're just going to have a bit of a squiz at the tension of it. So you can see down there's a better shot there. You see F for front cylinder. Okay, so here's now the cams, and you can see there's little arrows there, and the number on that one is 3, and the number on the other cam is 2 with an arrow. So what you've got to do is to be counting 16 links between them from arrow to arrow, and then down here there's 2 arrows facing each other. Again, the numbers 2 and 3. Now if you've got all of that and lining up with F and the line on the crank there on the flywheel, you will have your timing correct. There's no guessing in it. You got your arrows connected, you got you link your chains. Even if you pull the whole chain off, you get that timing right and you're going to be fine. You can see the cam chains, this is the slack, and it is a little bit loose, and that's why I've had the terrible grinding noise at times, which is different from the normal cam chain slap. Having a little cam chain noise is normal. Okay, so now this is where some people say, well, you should pull off your radiator tube. I've chosen not to, but it's, you know, it's up to you. You could probably get it out of the way and make this a little bit easier, but I've found that I'm able to do this with the standard Allen keys. So I just move the radiator around a bit. You might want to put a piece of towel or something like that over your front guard so you're not scratching it with the radiator, but it's doable. So you can see here I push the tube down so I'm able to get to the rear one. Again, you got to get a bit of clearance there, so I'm going to use my little tube spanner to make an extension, sort of like a little mini breaker bar, and that way I'm going to be able. So I've undone both of them now. Remove the bolt carefully again, because you don't want to drop one of them in, and then you pull out your adjuster, which is fully extended here, but it wasn't extended enough to stop my can chain slapping around the place. So that's the automatic ones. So now I'm getting the manual ones. Remember that there's a gasket with it. You don't want to not put the gasket in. Yeah, they give free gift tyre valve things, so that'll make your bike stand out. Anyway, I won't be using them. So you put the gasket on, and again, just be careful and that you don't drop bits into the engine, although in this case it's pretty straightforward. Now this you can just hook in there. I probably should have extended that a little bit. You can generally extend it down about 1 inch, because it won't be you won't be getting it touching anything at that with it all out like that. The other thing you need to notice is that there's a rubber O-ring there. See, I'm pointing with my finger. It's a little bit hard to see it, but there isn't a rubber O-ring. Don't forget that that's there. That's why it's a little bit hard to spin in. Now I'm putting the bolts back in and tightening them up. Again, just be careful how you do that. Don't over tighten them. And then so I'm pointing out the O-ring, and then you can probably spin it the manual adjuster down with your fingers, and it's okay. So you see I put it down a little bit. Otherwise it's a 14mm spanner. So generally you need two 14mm spanners. Now if you remove the air box, like if you're taking the tank off the top, remove your air box, then you can get a better go at it. You might be able to use for a different tool. So I'm now measuring my tension, and it should be about 7 mils. I just use a ruler there to just see what the slack is. So I've got it about right here. So you see it's taut, but it's not really tight. So there is a slight bit of movement there, about 7 mils. Now after I put all the bike back together and then started up, I realized it actually was still a little bit too loose, and I just gave the tensioner a bit more of a turn. And you can do it by ear, but it's best in the first place to make sure that things are right here. Now I'm also testing the links here. If those links move on those gears, replace the whole cam chain because it's stuffed. But in my case they weren't moving at all. The links were still okay, and so I'm quite happy to keep that cam chain on there. Now it's time to tighten up the adjuster, because I've got it in the right place. So I use one 14mm spanner to hold the upper nut and keep it still, and the lower one to tighten it so it doesn't lose its adjustment and it stays in place. Now remember that O-ring is there, and so you're actually pushing the O-ring into the slot to make sure that no oil comes out. Now you just want to be making sure that your timing is right before you put the cover back on. So remember to check down there on the flywheel, F for front cylinder line. Check your cams, so the numbers 3 and number 2 and number 2 and 3, and that the arrows align up. And so what I'm doing here is now counting, just using my thumb to count the links to make sure it's 16 from one arrow to the other. And there's no guessing here. You will not get it wrong as long as you keep to those rules. Okay, so I bought these, and it's worth it. They're not much. You can get them, 20, 30 bucks, that sort of thing. So they're hex heads instead of on a socket instead of an Allen key. Now you will need them for the rear cylinder to get the cam chain adjuster out and put the new one in. You can see there I've already got it in place, so I've got my ratchet there, a couple of extensions. I'll show that a little bit later, and you can see that there's the cam chain tensioner down there for the rear cylinder. And you can't do this with an Allen key. You have to have this extension bar and the sockets for the hex head, and they come out really easy. You don't have any trouble at all. Okay, so we're now going to be taking out these cover bolts, and they're the same as on the front cylinder, so they're not too hard. And because that one's a bit tricky, and so you can't get the socket down, so I've got my little breaker bar and an Allen key because the frame there, that's the tricky thing with these bikes. The frame, if you had the engine out, it's fine, but you got to improvise while you keep the engine in. And so you see I'm just using the Allen key on that particular one. Otherwise all the sockets are easy. So I've done that now. I'm pulling off the cam cover, and same as the front one, although you don't want to mix them up because they're not identical. I think one's got F and one's got R on it somewhere, I haven't seen. But the same thing here. So there's a cover. You've got the 3 little hex bolts there for the cam chain. I guess you call that part of the guide. And just be aware there, this is even more dangerous to drop the hex bolts down there or anything. So make sure your area is clear and that nothing drops down into the engine, because it can make a simple job into a real nightmare. So you can see here now I'm using my ratchet. Alright, so now I'm taking the cam chain cover thing off, and now though I had, it looked like I was taking off the cam chain tensioner before, I hadn't, so it's still in place. And now I'm just going to check the tension, because you don't want to be pushing down this chain if you don't have the cam chain tensioner still in it. Okay, so there you can see it's actually quite taut. In fact, I could just leave that automatic tensioner in there, but I've decided I'm going to change them both to manual. You know, and there's no reason why, you know, I shouldn't. So here there's a good view of how I've set up the ratchet. So you can see I've got an extension there and a little one, and that's got the flipping head. Now I'll just have a close up of this. Now this is really important. This sort of stuff can make it a nightmare or make it simple. So that end thing can move, that the socket can actually move, means that I can bend it up enough to get that. So there's a tensioner. That's the auto one, and I'm going to keep them. They're not broken. The springs might be getting weak. My bike's about 35,000 Ks. That's what happens, but you know, you might decide that you don't like the manual tensioners and pop them back in. Here's a better view of the O-ring on the manual cam chain tensioner. Now you notice that, so there we go, so you can see that. Make sure you don't break it, and if you do, put on another O-ring, otherwise you're going to have oil piddling out of that hole. Notice also that I've wound it in about an inch when I'm putting it in, because it just saves you turning it when it's in an awkward space. So I'm now going in with my arm along the length of the swing arm and just getting in there and popping it in place. Now you can see actually from the top of the engine, you can see that bolt going, the manual tensioner going in. Okay, here's a side view, and you can see that I've actually got the hex bolts in there, or you can choose to thread them actually onto the tool itself and then thread them in there along as you push the whole tool along the swing arm, and then guide them in from the top. Right, so you can see that I've put my left hand using the ratchet down there and putting my right hand guiding it from the top. Just to make sure that I can hold everything in place there. And so now I'm just tensioning the nuts with the just with my fingers, and you'll be doing probably a fair bit of fiddling just to get in there, depending on the size of your hands. Unfortunately, I've got fairly big hands, so it makes it a little bit tricky. Okay, so what you want to do now is from the front cylinder timing, you want to rotate it 360 degrees, and in the rotation of the engine, and then you come back here and you'll see that the timing can be set in the same way as the front one. It looks a bit different, so the rear one there, what's it, is it a 2? And then you count the 16 links along to the... Okay, just checking. So then what you do, and this is different to the sv650, you rotate the crank, and I think it's only 180 degrees, and then you see this, it's an R, 1R instead of 1F. F is for front timing, and then 1R, and when you got it on 1R, and then you look at the timing here on the cam chain, you'll see that the 2 and 3 will be facing each other. The arrows will be facing each other there, and you got your timing. You got your timing right. So you sort of double check your timing. You do it with F, and that'll, even on the rear cylinder, that'll show the 2 and the 3 up the top when you count the 16 links, and then you rotate it to R, and then you see that the 2 and the 3 face each other here. So it's a little bit confusing. You best download the sv650 manual, have a look at the diagrams on it, and you'll feel more. Then put everything back together. Okay, I've put some of it back together now, or most of it. I just haven't put any of all the rear stuff on because I don't want to have to pull it all off again if it wasn't right. But you can see now, you can't see, very hard to see the rear cam chain tensioner, but it is in there. Here, so you can see it, so it's all tightened up, and just around the other side. there's the front one, and and the proof is in the pudding. So I'll just start the bike. So the bike started now. You can hear the cam chain, but it's not doing that rattling anymore. Now I did have to adjust it a little bit, so I just used my 14 spanners on here. Just turn the top one a little bit in, wind it in, and then and loosen that, and then retighten it once you've got the right tension. Same thing with the rear one. The rear one's a bit more tricky though, because you've got to use that wrench along here and get it in there, and then get your 14mm socket, and you shove it up there, and then from this side that's where you put your 14mm spanner. I don't know whether you can see it in there. Oh, actually, hang on. There you go. You can see the cam chain tensioner up the top. I'm a lot happier with the bike now. Hope you enjoyed the video.